Okay,
Okay, so we'll call the meeting to order. So if we could have a roll call.
you got it. Mr. Belichick,
Here.
Sally Reed,
Here.
and Mark Johnson. Here. Nice to have a quorum.
Yay. And then for possible action to approve today's agenda.
Move to approve today's agenda.
And I'll second that.
Thank you. So we're all in favor of that. Okay. And then we do have minutes from the January 15th, 2020 meeting from a long time ago, and then our December 21st meeting from 2022. Has everybody had an opportunity to review those?
I did, but I'm going to abstain from commenting on the approving the 2020 meeting minutes since I wasn't there.
Yeah, I believe at the time the subcommittee was made up of Sarah Chavilicek, Diane Vanderwell, and Peter Gower.
Peter Gower, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, Jessica, as a point, can we just put these into the record?
I think you need a motion to approve, and although
I have to abstain as well. So
Mark and Shelley were not there,
So I can make the motion to move the minutes from January 15th.
Mark can participate as to the form, but not necessarily the substance.
Okay.
So I'll make that motion to move the minutes from the January 15th, 2020 Regional Planning Commission School Subcommittee meeting forward for the record.
And I think it's common in these types of situations when you have a carryover from a subcommittee, even though Commissioner Reed and Commissioner Johnson were not present, you can still vote on the motion.
So that would be vote to approve the motion. Okay. So I guess I would second Commissioner Chavilicek's motion.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone. Now, item B, December 21st, 2022 meeting. So
Commissioner Johnson.
all three of us were there.
On that one.
I'll let Commissioner Johnson go ahead and make the motion,
I'll make the motion to approve.
and I'll go ahead and second that. 2 for 2.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So those are now in the record. Do we have any public comment?
We received no public comment.
Okay, thank you. So now on to business of the day.
Excellent. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll take it in to start here. So we have item 5A for possible action, discussion and possible action regarding an update to the guidelines for projects of regional significance. We have a short little PowerPoint we're going to bring up. Try that one. Yeah. And then while we can bring up the packet and show the proposed changes, but I'll just kind of generally walk through what we've done and then be happy to answer any questions. We're going to share the PowerPoint. Just hide a million things first. Okay, so are folks on Zoom able to see that title slide?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, we can go ahead and I already read that, so we'll go to the next one. Okay, so just a quick list of what we addressed generally, and we can go into the specifics of it. Most of it's pretty much what I would term housekeeping edits, based on what we discussed at the previous subcommittee meeting. So there was, in what I'm calling the whereas section, which is basically the beginning there where the resolution says whereas stuff happened. There was a few times that the resolution was actually updated that were missing from that list of whereases. And we can go to the packet if we want to. We can go to page 35 of the Bates stamping. There's some packets over here, guys, if you want them. But basically the May 8th, 1996 update and the June 28th, 2000 update were missing from the list. So we were able in our research to find that those had happened, and we wanted to make sure that they were memorialized correctly. So that's the first big change. In terms of clerical errors, There were just a couple of strange little track change things that were remaining. Nothing too sinister in there, so we fixed that up. Corrected outdated references to statutes and other documents. So in this case, we wanted to make sure that we were referencing the Section 404 of the Clean Water Act for Section C. Also, the Washoe County Health District Board of Health has changed their name to the Northern Nevada Public Health District, I believe it should say right there. No, it's just Northern Nevada Public Health. So we've got that in there. I don't think they've actually completed the full rebranding, but they've approved it. And so to future-proof this document, we made the change. Further, there is no longer a definition for or a section for infectious wastes, but in talking with the health district, they identified that biohazardous waste section would be similar and would cover it. So we've added that in. That's in section D on page 37 of the packet. And then in section E, we spoke about this during the last subcommittee meeting, that we wanted to make sure that we were following through on what state law says that the RPC has the authority to include in these guidelines. Previously, or the current version of the resolution only references paleontological resources, but the state law mentions in addition historic, archaeological, cultural, or scenic resources. And so we've just added that in, but with the caveat that still remains that these resources need to be specifically identified in the master plans of the local jurisdictions for there to be this trigger for PRS. So it has to be an archaeological site that's actually listed in the master plan. And then if there was going to be a case that's going to affect that, that would trigger a PRS. But if it's just a site that's out there, obviously there are some rules and regulations that govern how those things go down, how they're reviewed in the moment, but it wouldn't require a PRS unless it's actually in the master plan. So that's kind of where we got to. I think everyone's on board with that. And then finally, the largest kind of substantive change, if you will, that we've added is a new section F. And I'll just go ahead and read it, and then we can kind of talk about how we got there. And it's the project will require a change in zoning, a special use permit, an amendment to a master plan, a tentative map, or other approval for the use of land, which, if approved, will allow for a new school within the TMSA with a planned student enrollment capacity of 500 or greater. We don't want to say students there. That is not identified in the Washoe County School District Facilities Plan. So the attempt here is to pick a number, a threshold number that, and we have some evidence to kind of show you how we got to this number, but that for any school, whether it's private or charter, those are never included in the Washoe County School District Plan to our knowledge, or even a Washoe County school that say came out of the blue, you guys need to do something from the school district perspective, and it was 500 or greater, we would use that, PRS review mechanism as well. But the typical way that would go down is that the school district would identify a need for a new school and include it as an amendment in their Washoe County School District Facilities Plan. And then that would come forward for a conformance review to the RPC. So that's the preferred method. But if that didn't happen, if timing was an issue, we could get it through as a PRS review and that would qualify. But really the target here is not the facilities plan schools or the school district schools. It is to capture charter and private schools of a certain size that have impacts. And so getting to this concept of impacts, let's go ahead and go to the next slide if we can. And we'll tell you a little story about how we tried to get after understanding. So what we're looking at right now is a map of the region. The black outline is the TMSA boundary. And then within there, we have red dots signifying any charter or private school that we were able to identify. We identified 33 of them, and we got pretty much a census of the whole thing. The green points are charters or privates that have 500 or greater enrollment size. And those really come down to Pinecrest out in Spanish Springs. It's the Coral Middle School, near the Washoe County, 9th Street area, Minogue High School, and the Doral Academy on Mount Rose. So you can take a look at the bar graph on the left there, the chart, and that's really showing the distribution of how those schools play out. And what you'll notice is that most of the charter schools are on the smaller side, 100 to 200, maybe 300 student enrollment. The idea here was to try to think about the burden to regional planning think about the process that could actually be implemented to catch these schools and to make sure we were targeting a number that made sense. It was pretty darn difficult to pin down any impacts from any of these charter or private schools. So let's go ahead and I'll push forward to let's go to even the next slide past this one right here. So here's a good example of how we kind of thought through some of the analysis that we did. So first off, we wanted to say, can we understand if there is a traffic impact from a location of a school? And so we went to the Trina website, which is the NDOT's traffic count repository online, basically. All of the pink hexagon shapes are Trina locations. And what you can see is that they're not necessarily right next to schools. And they certainly are not capturing, in this case, this image, specifically the ingress or egress locations of the school. So difficult to tease out what we were seeing was actually a school impact or just a traffic impact. We did try to look at, for these purple locations, not all of them, but some of them had basically half hour to 1 hour, I think they were half hour time chunks where they had counts of actual vehicles. Sometimes it would be during the week, and you could contrast that with the weekend day to try to pick up a school signal. Other times you could not. And so the data were they were not collected for this purpose, I think is the key to what I'm trying to say. We tried to use the data that were available, but what we found in the end was that there were few to no locations where we thought we were actually picking up a purely school signal. And we think that to get at those traffic impacts would actually require more of a targeted traffic count study program that we'd have to put at the schools to really decipher that. We looked at both charter private and public, Washington County School District schools. You can see on this map, blue triangles represent school district facilities and the round circles are the privates. So the other thing we're looking at here is proximity. And we wanted to get a feel for, are there nodes where there's a lot of schools that we want to be thinking about, okay, if we add another school to this location, is that going to, do something with enrollment and traffic that's going to create an impact? In the end, we found that was a bit of a problematic analysis as well, because if you look at, say, like a half-mile buffer, almost all the schools have another school in proximity. If you look at a quarter-mile buffer, about 43, so about a third or less of all schools were within a quarter mile. But again, does not really get at certainly the traffic impact based on, road distance as opposed to Euclidean distance. So again, I think it's when you have a case like, which former Commissioner Hartung, used to mention, Eagle Canyon, that road where you had a middle school and a high school right next to each other, and they're utilizing that exact same resource. We didn't find road resource. We didn't really find a lot of evidence for that elsewhere. But we did take a look at this proximity idea. And in the end, if we can go back to the previous slide, in the end, since we couldn't really develop a very clear connection between either proximity or traffic, we thought we would look at the overall distribution of the charter and private schools. There's 33 of them. That's this graph. And we ended up drawing a line at the top, about 13% of that group, as to say, we don't know for sure. We haven't been able to measure specifically these impacts. We have stories about the impacts. We have perceptions about the impacts. But there is also probably a logical relationship between the larger the school, the more risk there are for these kinds of impacts. And so in the end, in order to kind of move this process along and see if we can get this new resolution adopted, we chose 500 based on this distribution in an attempt to capture what seemed like the schools that would have the greatest impact. Which is not where we want to be. We'd love to be able to just go mathematically, these are the schools, right? It's just, we don't have that information. We couldn't come up with any other analyses that would get us there. So with that, happy to take questions, open it up for comments or whatever.
So, Jeremy, to that point, this is exactly why I have so much heartburn over this, is because, you know, that no one has done or put a mechanism into place to understand that there is impact. And if any of you, I mean, and we talked about this last time, you know, you've got county staff there. If they tried to leave the county complex around 2:30, 3 o'clock, Coral Academy over there would impact them, you know, and then if you're over by, you know, and then when Doral and Galena, there's huge impacts. You know, all these private schools that do not have a bus system, there's a profound impact on the neighborhoods. And it's just, to me, it's an embarrassment that our region hasn't come up with a way to view that, you know, understand that traffic count. And then even in our public schools, when you know, Stead Boulevard from 7 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon is 15 miles an hour because of and all the entire day because of Stead Elementary and O'Brien Middle School, because they're side by side. Now, you know, people that live out there know how to deal with a 15-mile-an-hour zone. Now, Plum Lane has the same thing where it's an all-day zone. It isn't just during school time. And so, I mean, I appreciate it, and 500 seems like a reasonable number. You know, and then, you know, Mark, you mentioned the old 24-hour fitness over by NV Energy. That corner is a debacle now when they pick up their kids from at Coral. It's kind of dangerous over there. It's an area like, ooh, I don't want to be there. So I guess as we're moving forward, if there was a way that if NDOT would look at ways that we kind of put up those traffic nodes or those counters that are around there, and you know, the impact of the school zones, the impact of the traffic, I think it would be really helpful. Because, and then the other question or comment that I had is that when you say, you know, the capacity of 500 or greater that is not identified in the Washoe County School District facilities plan, we as commissioners are, if we feel that the school district has brought forth their facility plan and we see some inadequacies in there, is that something we can still address?
That's certainly part of the conformance review process for the school district facilities plan. And the things that would trigger a conformance review of that plan would be if the school district elected to modify the plan, they would bring it forth for a recheck. And further, if we modify our plan, so if we do our regional plan update, which we will in 2024, then all the plans need to come back in for a check in case there's some new elements. So those are the opportunity. That would be the opportunity moment to evaluate any of the schools that are in that plan. And further, to the point about the speed control, there is a policy in the regional plan which seeks to avoid the placement of speed control mechanisms for schools located on arterials. Like basically it says schools of a certain size don't locate on an arterial that causes the speed control. Mm-hmm. So, you know, going forward, that will be addressed. But, you know, of course, we have areas where that's already the case.
Right. Okay.
I think that another aspect, just to kind of rip off where we didn't get with the analysis, sometimes the analysis is that we don't have the stuff to, you know, find exactly what you're looking for. But we were a little concerned about how to manage this at the jurisdiction level, because this is not coming through kind of an official master plan type request. You know, these schools come in for basically like a permit. We wanted to make the regulation for staff at the locals very clear. And when we started getting into the proximity analysis, we could tell that was going to get muddy really fast. And we weren't exactly sure how we could prop up something so that any charter school that came in would have to be evaluated against a spatial layer. Like that's just all of a sudden creating a lot of hoops to jump through that might be very difficult to implement. Whereas identifying the enrollment size at that some number seems pretty doable by staff. I don't know, they're behind me. They probably are shaking their heads right now. But it seems like that would be not onerous and would, again, capture those schools, which we've talked about. Coral, which has come up, Meadows, you know, and Doral, which all seem to be the schools that on the charter and private side that are having these impacts. So that's why we went with the number and didn't add a locational aspect. But of course, we're open to ideas.
I think the 500 number is very reasonable. Shelley, you look like you had some questions.
500 is a small school, and most elementary schools are 700 right now. That's a standard. I know it's charter schools and private schools, but I just think that, you know, how many trip generations does a 500 student school generate? I don't think it generates over 6,250, but I think proximity to other schools is where, or other things is where the problem is, not the school. So I have a problem with the 500 number. I think there needs to be other considerations besides just saying if you're over 500, then it's going to be required to go through the PRS and meet those thresholds.
Shelley, if what I was listening to Jeremy say, right now we don't have the traffic numbers to be able to legitimately come up with a trip generation number. Would that be a fair statement, Jeremy and everyone else?
Yes.
Yeah, and I heard the same thing, and that's a concern because I don't, you know, when you look at the guidelines of the Nevada statutes of trips that generate, what is it, 6,250 trips daily, a 500 school is not going to meet that threshold. So I think 500 is still an arbitrary number, and it just doesn't make sense from my perspective.
I guess what I would add to that, though, is because the 500 school applies to the charters, not the district schools.
Right.
And because there is no transportation that's provided to those charters. So even though their impact is, even that some of those charters they've gone through some really tricky design to create a like Doral on Galena has this continuous loop, but Pinecrest has a modified one like that. But on Coral Academy over by the county complex, the turning lane isn't big enough to accommodate all those cars, you know, first thing in the morning and then in afternoon when people are coming to pick up their children. So I think, and I don't disagree with you. I think that 500 is somewhat arbitrary, but for me, it's the bigger picture because there is no school transportation to and from for the charters.
Yeah, but it still is not going to generate, it's still not going to meet that. It's still not going to generate more than 6,250 daily trips.
No, certainly won't. And I think one of the reasons that I think folks want the guideline added is because it will never, even when I've spoken with school district staff, Adam, who's in the room, in the past, the largest high schools do not trigger that. The peak, if there was an accounting for peak time, maybe there'd be something there. But I think one of the other things we're trying to solve here is that there's a gap in terms of public review, if you will, certainly for conformance with the regional plan. It depends on the school and the site and the, you know, what the jurisdictional staff decide is necessary in terms of a special use permit or whatever. But there is a gap in terms of review. Every school, no matter the size, that the school district has in their facilities plan, we're looking at each and every location, including future locations, and taking a look at that as part of that overarching review. This would really just be to fill that gap on the charter private side for the very largest ones. And when we looked at the 33 charter and private schools we identified in the region, only 4 of them were 500 or greater, only 4 of the schools. And so I think we took a stab at this number in an attempt to make sure we were at least applying the PRS to those very large schools that we've heard, do seem to have traffic impacts at peak times. And, I think the RPC has the authority to address that, even in the absence of a specific analysis that gives us a perfect number. It can be a discretion thing.
I think there's 2 things that come to mind here. One, just to go along with the conversation there, and I think Jeremy, you touched on there. The issue here is not trip generation; it's peak hour traffic. It's the same thing that we hear, jurisdictionally where the problems are. It's the things that kick in the requirements for traffic analysis, potential traffic changes. It's all based on peak hour traffic, which is not something that ever finds its way up to the regional level. So I think and I don't know from the 3 jurisdictions even that any of the schools that we're doing, whether they're, school district or charter, are kicking in some of these conditional use permit reviews based on peak hour traffic. I don't know that that's one of the conditions that comes in. So I think what we're identifying here is that a 500 student school, peak hour traffic with no, transportation is going to have 400 to 500 trips during that hour, which is going to certainly raise some flags at the jurisdictional level. Whether it kicks it up to a conditional use permit or anything like that, I can't answer that. But I do think that that's the thing, at least looking at it from the planning commissioner's standpoint, we want to be looking at it, we want to understand. So if there's a peak hour condition that, necessitates a stoplight or an additional turn lane or some other version of, traffic management, that would most likely be a requirement of the local jurisdiction. I do think that then kind of kicks in this idea that we're looking at from a more regional level. Because certainly from a school district standpoint, when you put in a new elementary school, new high school, there's all kinds of traffic studies involved. There's all kinds of changes that the local jurisdiction is going to require that we as the regional have acknowledged by not requiring it, since it's a part of the main submittal. So I do think that setting a number, and if 500 is the number, I think that makes some sense. I was looking at, the requirements in statute that talk about, the student population of not less than 325 students. And I was trying to kind of wrap my head around why that number exists. We don't really worry about it because it's all addressed kind of globally as a part of the master plan, is my understanding.
Well, my understanding of that number is it was added later. It wasn't in state law. It was added, and it was a accommodation for the impacts of a housing development, really, onto school infrastructure.
Right.
It's really more of the opposite direction.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not the school that's kicking it in. It's saying, hey, there's 325 students that are a part of
that's going to impact enough schools that we want to look at it.
Which certainly makes some sense. So I think from that standpoint, I do agree with Shelley that 500 seems arbitrary. And staff even. But I do think in looking at that breakdown of what we have, if we were to lower that threshold, I do think we get into a situation where we are putting, a little bit too much on what could potentially be a, 100 or 200 student school. And I do think that the other advantage to keeping it at 500 is that there are, from a charter school standpoint, often they have aspirations beyond what they're doing when they open. So if you are identifying that you have a piece of property or a desire to have K through 12 education, at some point in the future that could exceed 500, but hey, right now you're just building a couple of buildings and you're anticipating, 100 people. I think we need to keep that, if this is what your build out is, that's where we need to be looking at it. So it doesn't adversely impact you when you come in with 100 or 200 or whatever, but we need to, if that's what your goal is. But if you're aspiring to a larger level and you've got the property for it, I think that's where this can help fix that gap where, there's a charter school that opens with 100 students. Next thing you know, they have open enrollment for 5 more grades. Right. 500 students are there like the next year, and all the people are going to be like, how did this happen? because that wasn't what it was. This would at least have the opportunity to address that 500, even if it's not where they are when they open.
Exactly, and that's what we kind of tried to get at with the a planned student enrollment capacity.
Exactly, and I think that was key. I was going to mention that, that it's a planned enrollment, not a
Physical right now.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think to that point, I think, I do agree it's arbitrary. I do think it's definitely a lower threshold than what the school district has to deal with. But I would agree with staff that we're trying to close a gap, and that gap comes about. And the reason we're talking about this is that peak hour issue that is not something that we look at the regional level. So from that standpoint, after that long diatribe, I think 500 is an acceptable compromise for where we are, because it doesn't put too much extra impetus on or undue difficulty on the smaller ones that we're talking that are, you even showed them the new picture. Those two schools are tiny compared to even the elementary schools that are next to them.
Right.
So I think it would be very hard to justify a regional, a PRS on a 50 to 100 student private school just because it happens to be across the street from Warner Elementary School. I just don't see that happening. Even if Warner is a pain in the butt to get to. So,
Thank you.
Do you have to establish a number?
Well, you don't have to establish a number, but the idea would be, again, to try to make it fairly, to have the clarity around what is or what isn't a PRS, and have something, I think, straightforward enough that it's, staff at the locals could negotiate it when these school requests come in.
And and I agree with Commissioner Johnson, is that any time that we can be as transparent as we possibly can to just, let the staff know, but as well as let the public know that we've given this thought. We know this stuff matters. And I mean, and I think the staff's analysis of looking at where the charter schools are, and I appreciate you all taking the time to do that, because it's not like you had time in your calendars to do it, but thank you for doing it. And I think it opened our eyes to how many of these facilities are there. And how truly many charter schools that we have, and then the 3 or 4 that are the largest and have the most impact. And as Commissioner Johnson said, it's that peak hour stuff that causes everybody heartache. And Commissioner Reed, I feel your pain, but I think we do need to have some sort of a bench there so people can see that it doesn't look like that TMRPA is putting undue hardship on entities, but recognizing that we're being stewards for the region and understand that this stuff does have impact.
Yeah, I'm just not sure if 500 is the right number.
Commissioner Reed, are you thinking it should be higher or lower?
Yeah, I think it should be higher.
I see.
Especially considering the Washoe County School District, their building schools, their schools are 700 or more. Their elementary schools are currently, that is there. Is that correct? Adam's in the room. I believe that's correct. So they're at 700 enrollment.
Yeah, he concurs.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I guess for me, what I would say is that if we raise that number, then for me, I wouldn't feel I was doing my due diligence to see where the peak hour impact is to families, because based on that last slide, that slide that you showed, we have very few schools that are doing that right now. You said that we have 4, right? 4 or 5.
33 of charter and private. Yeah, only 4 are 500 or larger.
Or larger, yeah.
Right.
Certainly on the Washoe County School District side, can we pull that slide up and take a look? We have also the frequency distribution of Washoe County Schools, yeah, we're gonna share again. Just so you can see that in comparison. Okay, so right here, we'll stay here. Oh, go back there. This is in total, those red bars represent 33 schools. You can see 2 of them are 900 or greater. I believe that is Doral
The
and
two, Pinecrest and Doral. Yeah.
exactly. And the Minogue is like in the 700, and I think the Coral Middle School is just over 500. And so everything else is smaller than that. And if we go now to the Washoe County slide. Okay, now we can see there's something like 105 schools in this total list, and 500 is actually that very tallest peak there. So that's probably a bunch of old elementary schools. And you can see that it really does taper off pretty quickly. And the largest schools are going to be the high schools out there. You can kind of see the spatial breakdown. The black triangles represent where Washoe County School District schools are in relation to the dots, which are the charter and privates. But you're absolutely right that 500 is a pretty low mark for a new school district school. So what that kind of means, if this resolution is accepted generally as written, that if the school district has not included a new school, probably any new school, in their facilities plan, and they want to do a new school, it's going to trigger this, because even an elementary school is going to trigger this. So any school that's not in the facilities plan of the school district would probably be impacted by this resolution. And then those largest charter and private schools would also be covered. And then the small ones, what we kind of tacitly be saying, I guess, is that those impacts are small enough that we don't believe they need a regional conformance review.
So are you also saying that, because I thought this was closing the gap and it was only going to include charter and private schools. So are you saying that this resolution would also include the public schools as well?
It has the potential to include a public school
Okay.
if the school is not already included in the adopted
Facility
facility.
plan.
Okay,
So I would think that would be very rare.
yeah,
Indeed.
okay. So
But
it does.
I mean, and I'm not targeting school district, but it also asks the school district to mind their P's and Q's too, to talk about, you know, the impact on the residents around the schools.
Right,
But we believe that the process, like we do with the Western Regional Water Commission, with the Regional Transportation Commission, that the process to review the school district's facilities plan is sufficient to get at the regional impacts of the schools. And, you know, we're working together on that. Currently, Adam has shown me the facilities modernization program stuff that's working. They're going to work to put a summary of that into the facilities plan. You know, so we're working in lockstep to ensure that you're going to receive, as the RPC commissioners, the ability to review for conformance with the regional plan changes to the planning that's going on at the school district. And so again, this is really just to, you know, I think the legislature passed a rule. I can't remember the number off the top of my head right now, but the idea was to make it pretty easy for schools to happen, right? We were having a crisis, overcrowding crisis, and we had this facilities review conformance process for school district schools, but we've just noticed through all this conversation that charters and privates are kind of in the Wild West a little bit. They're just kind of doing what, I mean, obviously there's an administrative review at the jurisdiction, and I have a lot of faith in that. It's being done very well. And I think the key is that we're trying to say, is there a need for a larger school to have a regional lens? And that's why we tended towards the larger end of the spectrum on that distribution of charter and private school sizes.
Well, and I think closing that loophole will give us some assurances that a Coral Academy and a Galena High School will never happen again.
Reviewing exactly that kind of information when it comes in, if it's a very large charter. Yep. So rather than enforce the proximity analysis directly in the guideline, which I think gets kind of sticky, we of course are going to be doing a proximity analysis as part of the conformance review. So that would be where that would come in, and we could make that, you know, can ascertain if that is a thing. It's not perfect. We wanted to offer you up something that had a better foundation, But in trying to do, we just, without absent kind of targeted study and really understanding these traffic impacts, I mean, we probably could try to model traffic with some ITE numbers and whatnot and see if we can come up with something there. But again, what would be the threshold through which we would say, and now we would choose a traffic number? We'd be kind of up against the same issue of picking the number. And I guess I never want to put something out there to wait and see necessarily, but we do need to get some of these other changes included. And I don't think that this addition of this guideline, given where the number is at, is going to be really harmful to the region. And I'll be surprised if we have more than one or two of these in the next, year or so.
Yeah, I agree. And like I said earlier, I think this just demonstrates the need for some more analysis, some more robust way to do this kind of analysis. And thank you to all of you who did this. Put those little circles and triangles.
Of course.
I do think, Mr. Tulowiec, just the last comment that I would make is I think it's interesting that, the charter schools that we've identified just in our conversations and the conversations I think that started this at the governing board level, the schools and the locations, those are the ones that meet this 500 threshold. So not hearing about the smaller schools, it's only these bigger ones. So I do think, if we were to use anecdotal evidence, I think this is, putting it at 500 and having the 4 schools that we can all name on our, hand where these are a problem, those would have been the ones that would have gone through this review. So I think that at least gives me a little better sense of the number being in the ballpark of what we're looking for. I would be curious, and I'm in no way asking staff to do this, but it would be interesting to know, as you say about, and anticipated or allowed enrollment, if any of those other schools that are, 400 and less actually have a capacity greater than what is actually there. It would be, just again, as a anecdotal type of evidence, but there may be some out there that this would, perhaps they come in for a special use permit or something to increase or for an addition or anything like that, that would then kick this into one of those existing locations. And I think that would be a reasonable thing to ask, to have them go through the regional review, because then, you could look at it from that higher lens. So I'm comfortable with the 500, whether it's perfect or not, I don't know, but I do think seems to be, hitting that spot in the potential guesstimates that we're making.
Other questions, or do you have more to cover on? We kind of stopped at F, so do you have more in the bucket?
Much it. Thank you. After F, it again is the we changed the public utility definition to be more accurate in terms of what's in state law, what it's referencing, and then we took again infectious out and replaced it with biohazardous. So kind of the same edit from previously. But that's it. Yeah, the substantive thing is really adding this new guideline, and I mean, I think we'll see if it is what it's intending to do. But certainly, it's going to capture, the Minogue high schools, the Doral academies, the things that, to Mark's point, that we have heard about throughout this process.
And some of the corals, yeah, it'll capture them.
And the schools, yeah. But I think it is a good question to find out about planned enrollments at these schools versus, their actual. And also, it'll be fun to work with folks behind me, again, the staff of the jurisdictions, to figure out, how we identify when this trigger is met and make sure that we have a process to do that. Fun.
So Jeremy, or the rest of the team, I'm just curious, did the Davidson Academy come up on this?
I believe it was there, but I don't think it didn't trigger the size threshold, but I believe it was in the list.
Okay, I'm just because of where it's located and
Thanks.
rental pickup and on a university campus, the challenges that faces, but yeah. Okay, any other questions, comments, concerns before we take action on forward this to the rest of our body?
I would just add that the plan would be then to bring this similar conversation and the feedback, you know, that we heard today, add that to what we present tonight to the full RPC.
Mhm.
And this is not the moment of final adoption because we gave the Regional Planning Governing Board, you know, they have one more chance to do their review and make sure it's, you know, we might hear back from them, but hopefully they'll find that this is acceptable. And if that is true and everyone agrees, then at the end of this month, we would bring the actual resolution back to the RPC for the final adoption. So this is just we're still in the talking phase.
We are still in the talking phase, but this is an action item for this subcommittee.
Absolutely.
So, Madam Chair, I will make the proposed motion.
Okay,
I move to direct staff to present the proposed draft with any recommended changes. I don't think we had any recommended changes. So recommend staff to present the proposed draft with discussion topics from this meeting of the subcommittee to the full body of the RPC for review. So I changed the chair.
I'll go ahead and second that.
okay. So all those in favor?
I,
Thanks, everybody. So on to now we're on to 6, correct? Reports, and then 6A, which we just kind of talked about, right?
Sure. I just have one question that I'd like to ask legal counsel at this time, and that is, this may be the last meeting of the subcommittee for some time. And in terms of minutes, are we capable of bringing the minutes to the full body for a vote, or do we want to just wait until? You can just think about that. You don't have to have the answer right now either.
I don't think we're gonna have the same lag again, and so I'll give it some thought, make a recommendation. Whether or not,
A 2-year lag might be problematic, but
Right. Yeah.
actually a 3-year lag now, or almost 3 years.
Okay, so possibly we'll be bringing maybe at the next meeting the minutes, maybe, or
perhaps, yeah,
Okay.
let me give it a little bit.
Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. That's
And then
all.
the next meeting is to be determined depending on what other entities do with this.
I
Exactly.
would just note, Madam Chair, I know that there is still the bigger, larger topic area of schools, even if identified on the Washington County School District plan, that this body has not yet been prepared to tackle. So I think there will inevitably be another meeting, probably within the next year.
Right, yeah, I agree, yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, item B, legal counsel report.
Nothing to report, Madam Chair.
Okay, so item 7, future agenda topic. We're not sure, because we're not sure we're gonna be called back in session. Item 8, public comment.
Okay, looks like we have none.
Okay. Item 9, written correspondence.
There's none.
Okay, so then we are adjourned until 6 o'clock when we meet again.
Thank you